my friend Tyler. This is his store. Guess how much his watch is?
It's free today.
Oh, it's free.
It's free.
So walk out with a $5,000 watch on my wrist.
That clip from 2020 feels like it was absolutely forever ago. At the time, I was into watches, but I wasn't in a position to be able to obtain some of the pieces that I really wanted. Fast forward a couple of years, and now I have this, which has been on my wrist every single day for the past 365 days. What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things, and today we are finally talking about watches. This is something that I've really never brought up on my channel before, and honestly, I don't really know why. You guys know I cover a lot of gear, specifically everyday carry gear, things and tools that are in your pockets and on your body every single day. Watches definitely fall into that category. This is a tool for everyday carry, and for some reason I've just never really talked about them. Now, some of you out there have a really keen eye because for the past year you may have seen this watch in videos, and I've been bombarded with questions, and typically I'll respond and say, hey guys, I'm bringing you a video on that, just give me some time with it, testing things out, gathering my thoughts. And you guys all want to know about this watch right here. Now, before we get into this, I want to preface this video right now and say I am not a self-proclaimed watch guy. I'm definitely into watches. I'm into mechanical things, cars, knives, firearms, all sorts of things that have really cool engineering and manufacturing, fit, form, function, all of that stuff. And watches happen to fall into that category. However, if you put my interest and knowledge next to a watch guy, like a proper watch guy, I'm very low on that totem pole. Then again, if you put my interest and knowledge next to someone who doesn't know anything about watches and doesn't really care about them, then I guess you would say I'm kind of a watch guy. If you've clicked on this video, there's a chance that you are a proper watch guy and you know more than me and you are wanting to nerd out about everything. That's cool, I appreciate that. But I'm gonna try to keep this video catered to everyone across the board, and we're just gonna be talking about watches as everyday carry tools. Now let's jump into the one that has been on my wrist for the past year to this day. When you're watching this video, this is the day a year ago when I was able to pick this thing up. The main watch that we're talking about today is this guy right here, the Rolex Explorer 2. Now, the clip in the beginning of this video is actually relevant to this story because back in 2020, I went to visit my buddy's jewelry store that is family owned. It's a small shop in Gulfport, Mississippi. I believe to this day, they are still the only Rolex AD in Mississippi, so it was really cool to be able to go in and see some of those watches. It was at a time where, of course, I could not afford that stuff. I was still trying to get my own business off the ground. I was freshly self-employed. So I was looking at watches in the cases just thinking like, man, these are incredible, maybe someday. Well, that day finally came because as I progressed in my own career and business, I was approaching a few really big milestones, and that is really one of the reasons why I like buying watches in the first place. As of right now, I don't really buy watches for show. I am not really into like gold and precious metals and things like that. I just like really high quality mechanical tools that you can wear on your wrist. People buy watches for all different reasons, and I'm not going to fault someone for purchasing a kind of high-end luxury watch. It's your hard-earned money. You can do with it whatever you see fit. But if someone does consider me a watch collector, I would say I am only going to be purchasing watches at true lifetime milestone events. So this watch came into play about a year and a half ago. I reached out to my friend Tyler at Pav & Broom Jewelry, and I said, hey man, I got a lot of stuff coming up. I'm actually selling one of my first full built vehicles, the Sat van, of course. I knew at the time that I wanted to take a lot of that money from the sale and reinvest it into my business, but I also set a little bit aside, that way I could finally get one of my Grail watches. So I reached out to Tyler. I said, hey man, I'm looking for a Rolex Explorer 2. Just put me on the list and let me know when something comes up. And luckily I didn't have to wait that long because these watches aren't like super sought after like some other things that you may see in the Rolex line. So he sent me a text and said, yo, guess what just showed up? So I then proceeded to fly all the way down to Mississippi to visit Pav & Broom Jewelers, and that was where this whole thing started. This day of travel was really not all that far, but it felt like an eternity to me because I just wanted to get down there and actually see this thing in person, because it's not every day that you get to see something like this, at least not for me. So I made it all the way down there, we got to the store, and I was treated to the full Rolex experience, which was pretty neat. Honestly, it was a little weird at the same time too, because I'm just kind of dressed how I normally am. So the staff at Pav & Broom treated me to the full experience, which was like champagne and caviar. Not actual caviar, but actual champagne and Swiss chocolate, and it was a really cool experience, even though I'm not really about fancy stuff. They even gave me this card, "Congratulations, Talon, from your Rolex family." So buying something like a Rolex watch is really truly an experience. I should say, at least when you're buying from a boutique or an AD. If you're buying from the gray market, that's a different story. But yeah, it was a really cool experience, although not really my cup of tea, feeling like fancy. I'm not a fancy guy. So anyway, I picked up the watch. This is the box and everything that it comes in. Typical Rolex paperwork in here. I actually picked up 2 different Rolex books as well. This is kind of like their catalog book here. And these are the 2 variants of the Explorer 2, the watch that I picked up. Also in the Rolex magazine, there is a whole article talking all about the history of the Rolex Explorer, the Explorer 2 in this case. And there's a lot of cool history about this watch, which I don't want to bore you guys with too much, but let's take a deep dive look into some of the specs, and this part is really for you hardcore watch nerds out there. So this is the Rolex Explorer 2, reference 226570. Inside they have an Oyster perpetual mechanical movement, and that is the Rolex caliber 3186. The same movement that you may find in some GMT Master 2 models. Because this is an automatic, you do have the blue hairspring in there, giving you a 70-hour power reserve when you take this thing off of your wrist. If you wear it every single day like I have been, you may never have to actually wind this watch, and we'll talk about that in a second. For accuracy, we're looking at plus or minus 2 seconds after the casing of the movement, and I travel frequently with this watch, so I'm always changing the time zones on here, and I will say that that measurement is pretty accurate. And now if you want to get real fancy talking about the movement, this is a 31 jewel movement. So there are 31 jewels in there, which they are using as basically bearings to make the mechanical watch function. Again, I'm not a huge watch guy. I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole and say something that is not correct, but it's really cool when you look into the actual movements that Rolex creates. So like I mentioned, I'm not really into precious metals, so this one happens to be all steel. The whole thing is of course oyster steel, which is in the 904L steel family. This type of material is used a lot in aerospace and the chemical industry, which offers maximum corrosion resistance. I've had this thing swimming in the ocean. I've had this on my wrist all over the entire country, and it does not tarnish, because that's why you spend a lot of money on a watch like this. Now the Explorer 2 is offered in 2 different dials. You have the white dial and the black dial. This is something that I was a little bit on the fence about. Originally, I saw the white dial version and I was like, dang. This watch right here, it just looks unlike anything else. Like when it's on a wrist, it just really pops. But then again, I don't really want it to pop all that much. So I saw the black dial in person, and then of course, ultimately ended with the black dial. The reason for that is because I did want to wear this watch every single day, which I have been, and I didn't want to draw like a ton of attention to it. A watch guy is gonna know what kind of watch this is, but someone who may not know about watches, they would probably look at this watch and just look the other way. If they would look at it with the white dial, it probably would gather more attention, and I'm not trying to gather attention with a watch like this. So the Explorer 2 comes with a 42mm case, which is fairly large, but I tend to like a little bit of a larger size case when it comes to watches on my wrist. My wrists aren't huge, but this one happens to fit me perfectly, at least in my opinion. It of course has a sapphire crystal with a Cyclops lens on there, which is ultra scratch resistant. You would need to find something like, I guess, a diamond if you're going to scratch this sapphire. And then the Oyster Perpetual of course has a screw down twin lock double waterproof crown system. It gives you water resistance up to 330 feet, which is probably like 100 meters or something like that. This watch does have a GMT function, which is that orange 24-hour hand in there. All of the hand and markers on this watch are actually lit up with their chroma-light display, so there's actually a blue lume in here when you get this thing in the dark, and the lume is really good. When I'm wearing this thing out camping, it will of course be charging when I'm out in the sun and maybe even some light from like the campfire, but then I'll lay in my tent at night and this thing will glow all the way until morning. So pretty impressive stuff on there. Now this thing has a fixed bezel with the 24-hour marks, which is actually pretty important because of that GMT hand. We'll talk about that in a second. And then for the bracelet, it is of course the 3-link oyster bracelet. Same steel as the rest of the case and everything, oyster steel, and it has a folding clasp right here, which also has their easy link extension. So if I hold the end of the clasp here and just pop it out, that gives me about 5 millimeters of extra length on this bracelet, which I have actually removed, I believe, 2 links out of. So with that easy link there, the watch now fits me a little bit looser in case maybe you're working out, riding mountain bike or dirt bike, something where you have to use your wrist a lot, or if your body is just swollen for some reason. You had a ton of salt in your diet for the day. You kind of swell up, so now you can get just a little bit more comfort out of this watch without actually changing much. So out of the entire Rolex line, why did I decide to go with the Explorer 2? And Rolex is of course known for making kind of like high quality fashion style watches, but that is not where they started at all. Rolex really started as a sport watch company. They were making watches that you are supposed to wear when you are outside adventuring and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It wasn't until a little bit later that all of the fancy materials came in with the golds and the platinums, white gold, and things that I'm just not really that interested in. So the Explorer 2 is really a dressy tool watch from the Oyster Perpetual collection. It's a little less flashy than the GMT Master and a little less bulky than the Submariner. I would say the GMT Master, the Submariner, and the Explorer are the only watches that are still mostly true to why Rolex started making watches in the first place. The craftsmanship is just unbelievable, and they are meant to be worn and they're meant to be used. Now, I don't want to bore you guys too much with the history of everything, but it does deserve at least a little bit of an explanation. So the Rolex Explorer, the Explorer 1, this came to market in about the 1950s. The Explorer 1 played a huge part in the Everest expedition of 1953, and from there on there were legit explorers all around the globe wearing these watches. Now, of course, as time went on and technology increased and more of these watches were worn in very extreme environments, they of course decided to make some changes. So Rolex decided to release the Explorer 2 in 1971. The biggest change that year was of course the addition of the GMT hand. So a watch like this with the 24-hour bezel, it's going to tell time just like a G-Shock would. You're going to be able to tell time just like you can on your cell phone. But what's cool about having a tool like this on your wrist is that with that GMT hand, you actually get multiple functions. A lot of explorers who are spelunkers, cave explorers, and divers and stuff like that, they will opt for a watch like this when they know that there is going to be some weird fluctuations with the light. Arctic explorers. These watches have been all the way up to the North Pole. I was actually just all the way up in the Arctic Ocean wearing this watch too, because the sun never truly sets up there, and if you're constantly moving, you're constantly on the go, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between AM and PM. So the orange GMT hand on here is really just to be used as a 24-hour marker. If that hand is on the right side of the watch, it of course is going to be AM or in the morning, and then if it is on the left side, then you will know that the indicated time is actually showing for the PM. You can also set a GMT hand as another time zone. So if I am currently on mountain time now and I go back to East Coast time, I can take the hour and the minute hand of this watch and change it to East Coast time, so I'm always on top of where I'm at. But then the GMT hand, I can actually leave that set to a different time zone like mountain time, so 2 hours difference. That way when I'm looking at the watch, I can say, okay, East Coast time, it is 3:23, but back at home, it is 1:23. So that's another cool reason for a GMT hand, but there was something that I found out after the fact that is even cooler, that makes this thing a true tool watch. If you have the GMT hand set to your current time zone and you are outside, you can actually use this thing as a compass. Again, the GMT function has to be set to your current time zone, and then the way this works is you simply take that orange hand on there and point it to the direction of the sun. So if the sun is over here, I'm going to kind of hold it right in that direction, and now 12 o'clock is pointing directly north. And I've tested this out like basically every day. Whenever I'm outside walking around, I always like position my wrist to the sun and everything. and it's a really cool function. So I'm telling time with this. You can kind of use it as a compass as well, and of course it does have the date on there. You do have to change that basically every other month when we're going from a 31-day month to a 30-day month. And then with that crown, that's also how you are going to be able to wind this watch to give it power. And that is something that I want to talk about. This watch has been on my wrist, sometimes even when I'm sleeping too, every single day for the past year now, and I have never wound this watch. The watch was wound in the store when I picked it up a year ago, and I have not wound it since. The power reserve on here is good for 70 hours, and of course I have not taken this thing off my wrist for that long, so I'm sure it would die eventually, or you could throw it in a watch winder. But I was trying to avoid that with this watch. I just wanted to wear it, get my money's worth, use it, be proud of it every single day, and I have not wound this watch, which I guess is pretty standard, but for me that's kind of like a cool thing. Now I do want to take a little bit of a closer look at this dial here, because this is another one of the reasons why this watch really spoke to me. Of course, it is black, white, orange, kind of gray as well. The bracelet and everything is that brushed oyster steel, but if you look at it from the side, it does have a little bit of a polish on it on the side of the case and actually on the side of the links as well. When we're looking at the actual hands on here though, the black and orange, I mean, that's just obviously my favorite colors out there. But if you take note of the hour hand of this watch, that is actually a Mercedes symbol or a tri-star. Now there's some deep history rooted in this as well, so a lot of people just look at that and they're like, oh yeah, it's the Mercedes emblem, which is kind of true, but do you know the reason for the Mercedes emblem, the tri-star? Back when Mercedes was first founded, they decided to use that tri-star configuration as their emblem because they wanted to conquer 3 different things with the use of motors as their transportation. They wanted to conquer land, air, and sea. So land, of course, automobiles, sea, they're using boats, and air, of course, manufacturing motors for airplanes. And that has been kind of a synonymous symbol with explorers out there, and that's why they use this on the Explorer watch, and a lot of GMT watches, I should say. I have had this watch in all different environments, of course, land, air, and sea, and helicopters and airplanes, swimming in the ocean, all over the place, from some ancient ruins down in Mexico all the way up to the Arctic Ocean, and this watch just really suits me. I even took it into a few different caves, which is really where this watch shines because of that GMT hand. That way, when people are in caves and they're exploring around, they know the difference between AM and PM. You got the blue lume on there, so it's going to be really bright in dark environments. And I actually went and explored a few different caves while wearing this watch. So I'm not even doing that stuff on purpose. I've just always lived my life kind of exploring around, and that's the type of videos that I make here on the channel. So that is the reason why I went with the Explorer 2, and I just absolutely love this thing. It gives me the memories of everything that I've done for 5 years with that Mercedes Sprinter van. Has a Mercedes logo on there. It's my colorway, black, white, gray, orange. I love the way it fits my wrist, and it's just a really cool memory piece for me. Not only did I buy this watch because I was selling that vehicle and could finally afford something that I really wanted, but also I got this watch at the same time that I hit my 5-year mark of working for myself, which is another reason, like I mentioned, why I like watches. I like watches that commemorate a huge lifetime milestone, and my next one is actually coming up pretty soon. So I've got my eye on something next. I'm not exactly sure if I will be able to get it, achieve finding this thing and actually getting my hands on it, getting the opportunity to buy basically any of these watches. It's really difficult, and that's one thing that I don't particularly love about like the high-end watches. It kind of seems exclusive, but it really doesn't have to be that way. So this watch was really the milestone for selling the Sat van, and of course 5 full years of working self-employed, running my own business. And the next milestone coming up is going to be 10 years on YouTube, which really isn't until 2026, but I'm already on the hunt for the other Rolex that I really have my eye set on, and I'm hoping I'll be able to find one somewhere. Maybe I'll fly down to Mississippi again, I'm not sure. This one's going to be a lot harder for me to achieve, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it. So that's a quick story about the Rolex Explorer 2. I don't know if you guys enjoy me talking about watches, but if you do, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on it. Let me know if there's anything else that you want to see as far as watch content goes. Again, not really that guy, not the watch guy, but I do enjoy a really nice piece of hardware on your wrist every single day. This thing is scratched up, it's taken a beating, and it just works time and time again. So if you have any questions on it, if I missed anything, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're new here, consider clicking subscribe because I make new videos every single week. As always, thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.